talk on Gustav Klimt and my associated talk on Egon Schiele provide a background to their work and brief description of the life of each artist. Now, Klimt was a shy man who never said much, and yet he became president of the Vienna Secession. And that role meant he had to defend his work and the work of other artists as his work became increasingly regarded by the establishment as unacceptably erotic. In fact, on one occasion described as pornographic. Yet he continued to be a successful society portrait painter, painting the wives and daughters of the rich and the famous. But as usual, let's start at the beginning. He was born in 1862 in Austria. He was the son of an unsuccessful gold engraver, so he was raised in relative poverty, the second of 7 children. His mother was a talented musician who wanted to be an opera singer, but her 7 children never allowed her to achieve that. His father wanted and prepared Gustav and his brother for the Vienna School of Applied Arts. He wanted them to be artists, and Gustav brilliantly passed the entrance exam when he was 15 and quickly became its most talented student. Now, when he was at the school, he lived in poverty and he studied architectural painting. He studied applied arts rather than fine arts because he needed to earn a living to support his mother and sister. He readily accepted the principles of conservative establishment painting, and his early work could be classified as academic. It was influenced by this artist, Hans Makart, the leading portrait and history painter in Vienna at the time. In the 1890s, Klimt painted a variety of commissioned male portraits and several studies, like this one, The Blind Man. Now, male portraits by Klimt are rare, and in fact none can be found in his later work. But at this stage he quickly became well known and received a commission to produce a mural for the State Theatre when he was only 24 years old. Here we see the entrance from the top of the stairs. The work he painted was Altar of Dionysus, also called Bacchus, the god of winemaking, festivity and theatre. And you can see Klimt's work in the arch, close to the ceiling, above the doorway. In the middle, there's an archaic head of a bearded god in gilt bronze. Beside it, you can see a small grey stone figure, or kouros. And below, there are 2 naked female figures holding symbols of the god. If you look more closely, one holds a staff tipped with a pine cone called a thyrsus, a symbol of prosperity, fertility, hedonism. In fact, if we look more closely, the woman looks as though she's overindulged in wine, and just reminds me of an anecdote. The Roman historian Livy wrote that a cult of Bacchus grew and grew in Rome, and drunken, uninhibited men and women of all ages and social classes would cavort in a sexual free-for-all 5 times a month. I don't know whether that was an exaggeration, but we know that in the end the Roman state arrested 7,000 members of the cult, most of whom were executed. We'll see later that Klimt evolved his own personal symbolism, and we also see how his paintings become more overtly erotic. And in fact, in the end, he stopped receiving commissions and depended on wealthy patrons, and I'll explain how that unfolded And later we'll also see he co-founded and became the first president of the Vienna Secession. And it remained the most successful artist of the day, but one who stopped receiving public commissions like this one. Now this isn't Klimt, this is Hans Makart, who was, remember, the leading establishment artist. This is the Five Senses, and Makart set out to shock the ultra-conservative Viennese society, who were looking to be scandalised and shocked. So it's a sort of a two-edged sword. It depends on the balance you took, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. Now Klimt at this stage was considered the successor of Makart, the most successful young artist in Vienna. And after Makart's death in 1884, Klimt started to receive many commissions. So he, his brother Ernst, and a friend formed an artistic decoration company called the Company of Artists, and in fact modelled it on William Morris's Morris & Co. Klimt was inspired by Morris, and both artists took decorative arts seriously. Let's look at another commission, the Berg Theatre. Remember, this was the period of La Belle Époque, and there were outstanding achievements in art and the sciences in Vienna. It was the centre for many artists and scientists and thinkers, philosophers gathered in Vienna. It was the time, by the way, when Franz Joseph ordered the wall, there used to be a wall around Vienna, to be demolished, and the Ringstrasse built with its many large buildings, including the Austrian Artists' Society, a theatre, a concert hall, opera house, and the Berg Theatre, which had originally opened in 1741 and was one of the most important theatres in the world. Mozart premiered 3 operas there. It was moved to the Ringstrasse in 1888 when this was commissioned. By the way, in 1945, the stage and auditorium were destroyed by Allied bombing, and there was a fire, and the building was restored in 1953 to 55. So Klimt began his professional career painting these interior murals and ceilings in large public buildings, many on the Ringstrasse, and he became famous for these murals. They had an erotic element, but that was acceptable as long as it was still firmly classical and or historical. They were found acceptable by the staid Viennese. And now Klimt painted 4 of the 10 paintings in the Berg Theatre, and this is one of them above the stairwell on the Volksgarten side. It's got this building that we're shown in the painting is a depiction of the London Globe Theatre, and what we're looking at is a final scene from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Most of the people you see here are the audience. On the far right is the only known self-portrait of Klimt. Let me show you an enlargement. Klimt is the man on the left with the beards, with the large rough collar. The man behind him in the red doublet is his brother Ernst, and the man with the rimless hat in front is the third member of their company of artists, their friend Franz Matsch. Now, he did so well that in 1888 Klimt received the Golden Order of Merit from Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, partly because of the contribution he made to the murals in the Berg Theatre. He became an honorary member of the University of Munich, of the University of Vienna. Now, a few years later, 1892, Klimt's father and brother Ernst both died, and he had to assume financial responsibility for his father's and his brother's families. And it was about this time, with this tragedy in his life, that he started to move towards a new personal style. The first crisis came at the turn of the century. Klimt was commissioned to paint several murals for the Great Hall of the University of Vienna, based on classical themes for representing the departments of medicine, philosophy and jurisprudence, known as the Vienna ceiling murals. The murals, that this was going too far. They were criticised as too radical, and in fact these are the murals that were described as pornographic. Klimt has transformed traditional allegory, that is classical mythological allegory, into his own personal symbolism. It's a new language that was more overtly sexual and hence more disturbing. There was a public outcry from many quarters, political, aesthetic, religious, and as a result the paintings were never displayed on the ceiling of the Great Hall. By the way, as a sort of footnote to this, to try and picture the average Viennese man at the time, you might imagine someone looking at a Klimt painting while listening to Mahler and thinking about Freud. Well, that might be true in private, but it was far from true in public. And although it was a multinational, multicultural society, and although there were many free thinkers, it was a rebel society that was run by a very conservative elite who regarded these rebels in a similar way to perhaps how the British establishment regarded punk rockers in Britain in the 1970s. In other words, they were allowed to be contentious and controversial as long as they were not taken seriously, and they wouldn't be given state commissions. The press ridiculed them. The press went along with the establishment. It was producing newspapers for the establishment, and high society rejected them. So this was Klimt's last public commission. Incidentally, the reason they look the way they do is these paintings, all three, were destroyed when retreating German forces burnt the Schloss Immendorf in May 1945. Just a little bit more about Klimt and the way he operated, but also about his I don't know whether love of his life is the right description, but it may be. Certainly in the 1890s he met the Austrian fashion designer Emil Louise Flöger. She was the sister of his sister-in-law, his brother's wife's sister. And she was to be his companion for the rest of his life. In fact, some historians believe that his painting The Kiss is of them as lovers, but I'm not so sure about that. By the way, in case you're wondering why I haven't included a self-portrait of Klimt, except for the person in the audience I just showed you in Romeo and Juliet, he said, "I have never painted a self-portrait. There's nothing special about me. I am a painter who paints day after day from morning to night. Whoever wants to know something about me ought to look carefully at my pictures." As I said, he was a shy man, taciturn, he didn't say a lot, yet his painting ability made him the leading artist in Vienna, and the reason why he became president of the Vienna Secession. Not his background. Remember, he had what you might call a lower middle class background. His father was a mostly unsuccessful gold engraver. Klimt spoke with a strong Viennese dialect. And his sometimes crude manners led to some describing him as a country bumpkin. But he would always dress appropriately in a suit and white shirt for official occasions and photographs. But in a studio, he always wore a smock like you see here, with no clothes underneath. And beside his mother, the most important person in his life became Emilie Flöger. She was 12 years older than him, and she founded a fashion store called Flöger Sisters. She founded it with her sisters, which over many years became the leading fashion house in Vienna, employing some 80 staff. But they never married. They had no children. They didn't live in the same apartment. She lived with her sisters and her mother. Klimt would often visit in the evening and would play cards with the family. So, as I said, he became a leading portrait painter in Vienna. His studio was divided into two rooms. One would have the wife or daughter of a rich industrialist that he was painting. At the same time, in another room were his models, obviously from poorer backgrounds. He would often take a break from painting a portrait of the wealthy to go in the other room to have a chat and perhaps often sketch a model. In his studio, as I said, he always wore a smock like this, and there would be many of his beloved cats running around. He did, by the way, have a series of affairs with his models, some of whom bore children. He kept these relationships secret from the public and would never be seen in public with his models or his illegitimate children. It used to be said that he fathered some 14 children. I think that's because when he died, there were 40 claims brought against his estate on behalf of 14 children. But historians now believe, and it's undisputed, it's believed he had 6 illegitimate children from 3 relationships. This is Nuda Veritas, Naked Truth, and on top of the work is a quotation from Friedrich Schiller. Roughly translated, it means, if you can't please everybody with your art, please only a few. Trying to please many is bad or terrible. Here we see Naked Truth holding a mirror that is reflecting the truth. And some believe that in this painting, Klimt is denouncing government policy, which was ignoring all the political and social problems in Vienna at the time. In other words, he's asking society to cast aside its fine and frivolous clothes and examine the naked truth concerning Viennese society. And it was about this time, a couple of years before, that Klimt became one of the founding members and president of the Vienna Secession. Now, the Secession, its goals were to provide exhibitions for unconventional young artists, to bring the works of the best foreign artists to Vienna, publish a magazine, but it didn't have a manifesto, and it didn't set out to encourage any particular style. It encouraged all styles adopted by unconventional young artists. The government supported the Vienna Secession and in fact gave them a lease on public land to erect an exhibition hall, which you see here. The building was actually financed by a wealthy industrialist, Karl Wittgenstein, who was the father of the well-known philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. It was designed, this building, by a well-known architect at the time, Joseph Ulbrich, and inside it was the well-known Beethoven Frieze by Klimt. The symbol of the group was Pallas Athena, the Greek goddess of just causes, wisdom and the arts. And the motto of the movement is written above the entrance here to translate: to every age its art, to every art its freedom. And below this you can see 3 Gorgons representing painting, sculpture and architecture. And on the left of the Gorgons you can see Ver Sacrum, Latin for sacred spring, which was the name of the magazine of the Vienna Secession, and it was published from 1898 to 1903, and mostly featured drawings and designs in the Jugendstil style, which is Austrian Art Nouveau. And in fact, Jugendstil is the style of art which is today most closely associated with the Vienna Secession. Let's look inside. In 1901, Klimt painted the Beethoven Frieze for the 14th Vienna Secessionist exhibition in celebration of the composer. And the frieze, the design, is based on Richard Wagner's interpretation of the Ninth Symphony of Ludwig van Beethoven, celebrating humankind's yearning for happiness. It's a painting that goes round the walls showing humanity's struggle to overcome hostile forces, finally finding eternal bliss in art. There's singing angels, lovers embracing, which I'll show you in a moment. It was meant for the exhibition only. The frieze was painted directly on the walls with light materials, but after the exhibition, thankfully, the painting was preserved. They removed the plaster of the wall, but it didn't go on display again until 1986. It's now on permanent display in the building in the Vienna Secession building, which is still in existence. It's now in a specially built climate-controlled basement room, which you see here at the bottom. The frieze is large. It's some 7 foot high, 34 metres or 112 foot long, and weighs some 4 tons. Let's briefly run through it. It illustrates the human desire for happiness in a suffering and tempestuous world in which one has to contend not only with external evil forces, but also our internal weaknesses. And the frieze takes the viewer round a journey of discovery. It begins, as you see here, at the top, with floating female genii searching the earth. And then on the lower level, you see, remember these are all at the same level around the room, but I'm showing them here at the lower level. There's a knight in shining armour who appears to offer hope because of his sympathy for the pleading, suffering humans kneeling before him to the left of the knight. The next section shows a dark, sinister, storm-wind giant, Typhon, and his 3 Gorgon daughters, and images from at the top left representing sickness, madness, death, lust and wantonness. The external and internal factors that influence all our lives. But then the journey ends in a discovery of joy by means of art, represented in the final on the right by a close embrace of a kiss. So the frieze expands on the psychological human yearning, and is ultimately satisfied through communal searching the beauty of the arts coupled with love and companionship. This whole work is celebrating the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven's Ninth, and so it's combining painting and music, which is called Gesamtkunstwerk, which translates to something like total or ideal work of art, a universal art, a synthesis of the arts, a work of art that makes use of and combines many different art forms. It was a term, Gesamtkunstwerk, that was first used in Germany in 1827, but is most often associated because the idea was taken up and used by Richard Wagner. We now arrive at his most well-known and popular works. He travelled a little, but not far. He had trips to Venice and Ravenna to see the famous and beautiful mosaics. Most likely his gold technique was inspired by this Byzantine imagery. In 1904, he collaborated with other artists on the lavish Palais Stocklet, the home of a wealthy Belgian industrialist, one of the grandest monuments of the Art Nouveau age. Klimt's contribution was in the dining room, including these two works, Expectation and Fulfillment, some of his finest decorative work. And as he said, probably the ultimate stage of my development of ornament, and blurring what I think is the arbitrary distinction between decorative and fine art, illustrated very well here by these works by Klimt. Now, by this stage, although he wasn't given public state commissions for the reasons I said, he was a very popular, well-regarded society painter of the wives and daughters of wealthy businessmen. And here he's painted a portrait of Margaret Wittgenstein, sister of Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher. And it was her father, remember, who financed the Secession building that we saw just now. And it's this sort of portrait that attracted wealthy businessmen to have their wives and daughters painted in this decorative, flattering style. And it's this style, I think, that explains why there's no male portraits, why businessmen didn't want to have their portraits painted in this style. It's too flowery, too decorative. And we come on to his golden period. This is one of the masterpieces of his golden period, and I think the work most loved by the public, an icon of Egon Schiele, the Viennese Art Nouveau. As I said before, I think I mentioned briefly that Klimt and Emilie Flöger modelled for the work, but there is actually no evidence or record to prove this. And despite this being exhibited shortly after the so-called pornographic Vienna ceiling murals, the Kiss was enthusiastically received and was purchased, still unfinished, by the Austrian government and put on public display. So they had mixed feelings about him. They didn't want to give him any more mural assignments, but they were happy to buy any work by him, by now perhaps the most famous painter in Vienna, if it was acceptable. And another of his famous portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, commissioned by her husband Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer, who was a Jewish banker and sugar producer. It was actually stolen by the Nazis in 1941, and it was in 2006, after 8 years of effort, that the Bloch-Bauers, the heirs, managed to get the painting returned to the family, and they sold it that same year for excuse me, $135 million, a record price for a painting at the time. And I think this portrait is the final and most fully representative work of Klimt's golden phase, which lasted about 10 years. Remember, his father was a gold engraver, and as I said, Klimt was inspired by the use of gold leaf by his trip to Ravenna in 1903, when he saw the Byzantine mosaics in the church of San Vitale. This is made of prima visi, remarkable in its posture and expression for a 9-year-old girl, although she told Klimt that she was willful and a tomboy, but still remarkable. Klimt made many sketches. He tried different poses, clothes and backgrounds before deciding to show her standing in a specially made dress amid these spring-like patterns. The picture also demonstrates the taste of her parents, the banker and industrialist Otto Primavesi, and his wife Eugenia. They were ardent supporters of progressive Viennese art and design. The painting's now in the Met. In 1910, Klimt had visited Paris and was influenced there by Henri Matisse and other French painters. His late portraits of women, many of them like this one, possess this French-inspired colourful palette and lively brushwork. Like this one as well, finished at the end of 1912 or possibly the beginning of 1913. The Virgin is one of the decisive figure allegories of his late career. It's a summation of his overarching theme of female erotic dream states. He believed, unlike Freud, that when we dream, we're not responsible. They're independent of us. So our dreams are separate from us, and we are not responsible for their content. And in this dream state, it enables him to explore various manifestations of life. And this picture here represents the stages of a woman's life from virginity to mature sexuality. The dominant figure of the Virgin is in the centre, asleep, swirling drapery covering her parted legs, and there are 6 subsidiary female nudes encircling her, each, as I said, representing a stage of life and themes like love and sexuality and regeneration. He as he did before many of his paintings, he made many life drawings. This is an early study for the emaciated nude in the lower left of the painting, obviously in a different posture. So it's not. It's one of many life drawings that he did before deciding on the final poses. But you can see from the drawing this emphasis on contoured outlines, and also I think in this and in the painting a relatively more three-dimensional and even voluptuous figure or set of figures when compared with his earlier emaciated female nudes. In the drawings, he strove to capture a particular mood. So the mood of the seated female nude seen from behind is of closure and introversion. Lady with a Fan used to be believed to be his last portrait before he died. We don't know who the woman is, but many believe it's Johanna Staud, an Austrian divorcee, and who's also subject of an unfinished Klimt painting, which is why some people say it's the same face. Some people believe it's his lifelong companion, Emilie Flöger, or possibly one of his favourite dancers. We can see here in the background and the fan and the clothing a mixture of Chinese and Japanese motifs. There's in the background a large flying phoenix, a symbol of immortality, rebirth and good fortune. There's bright pink lotus blossoms associated with love and beauty. This painting, by the way, sold at Sotheby's in 2023 for $108 million, the highest price ever achieved in Europe for a work of art, and was bought by a Hong Kong dealer. or collector. Which brings us to the end of my talk. You might have seen this in the news recently, January 2024. Believed to have, or was lost for 100 years. Painted in the final year of his life. Will be auctioned in April 2024. And the auction house has said, a painting of such rarity, artistic significance and value has not been available on the art market in Central Europe for decades. I think probably true. It was started in May 1917, unfinished when he died in 1918, and then handed on to the Lisa family. She was the daughter of the wealthy industrialist. We know, which is sort of interesting, that she made up to 9 visits to his studio, and there are faint pencil marks on the background which suggest that he intended to elaborate the background. In other words, it's an unfinished work. This and the previous paintings were found in his studio when he died suddenly of a stroke and pneumonia, believed to have been brought on by the worldwide influenza epidemic, Spanish flu of that year. And many paintings were found unfinished in his studio. Now, although he founded no school of painting, he is a much loved artist by the public. His work has fetched some of the highest prices at auction. So thank you for your time and attention. I look forward to giving you the next talk, and it's goodbye for now.